Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Ruby for the Web. I'm your host and your professor, Dr. John Baugh. For this lecture, we're going to be discussing classes and objects ultimately, and object-oriented Ruby. So, as an overview, in case you're not familiar with object-oriented programming or need a refresher, a class is basically like a blueprint. We can look at it as a blueprint. An object is a specific instance built from that blueprint. Okay, so for example, you might have a blueprint describing what a house looks like, but you don't really live in the blueprint. Okay, you create objects based on that class that are the actual houses. Okay, so they could have different colors, different materials, all sorts of different possibilities. In Ruby, classes and objects themselves are both considered first class, meaning you can ask any value what its class is, and even call methods on classes because classes themselves are objects. So that gets a little bit confusing for people coming from other languages. But if this is all fairly new to you, don't worry about it. We'll move forward with this, and hopefully it will sink in a little bit as you go along. Now, you don't have to be too concerned or too worried if you get through this whole lecture and you're like, wow, some of that's still kind of confusing. It might take a little while to mull it over, and in some ways it may even be more confusing if you have come from another language, because some of it's just so different from how other languages do it. But some of it's very similar. So Ruby's object-oriented model includes the usual ideas. We have encapsulation, we have instances, meaning the objects. Those have methods, but you can also have class methods and variables. So instance methods and variables and class methods and variables. The class methods and variables are similar to static methods and variables in other languages. We also have things like inheritance, polymorphism, and we can add flexible modules for namespacing and mixins. Okay, so this is mostly going to focus largely on the encapsulation aspect, but we will also talk about mixins and things like that. So for code, let's create a file here. I already have a project set up. Actually, before we even do that, I'm going to first do some per project setup like we normally do. So I went to terminal, new terminal. Let's do gem install, I don't want to spell it right, gem install bundler. Okay. Give it a minute. All right. And we want to create the actual project. So I want to do bundle init. That'll create the gem file in case we want to add some stuff to it. Some useful gems or things like that. So again, just for practice, we might want to add things like, we may not even use these, but again, RSpec, that's for testing. You might want something like Rubocop, and then require false. Gem, we might want pry group. Say development. So that'd be like for debugger, things like that. And you can install the gems inside the project once you have them listed there. RSpec, did I do that right? Yeah, Rubocop. There we go. Okay, so bundle config set path, and I'm going to just make it vendor/bundle, and then bundle install. We're going to give that a couple minutes to actually perform its installations. Alrighty, there we go. I cut that for a couple seconds so it would install. Didn't take crazy long, but it takes longer than you need to just be staring at it. So I pause the recording on that. Let's create a new file though. We're going to call this one person test.rb. And for this, what I want to do is create the person test RB file and then put the code in it. So I'm going to do class person, and inside there, the initialize method is going to run when you call person.new. So this is kind of like a constructor if you're coming from another language. So when you call person.new, okay, it is a method, but remember, we can, if there's no parameters, we can just, we could leave the parentheses out. This one will have parameters though. So def initialize, okay, name, age are passed in. And then inside there, we're actually creating instance variables with live, or instance variables live with this object. Okay, so they come to life when you create an instance of the object, and they do live inside the object. So that's what the @ symbol is doing. So you don't really have to declare them up here or anything. You just put them in the initialize. So again, that's kind of like the init method in Python or a constructor in other languages. Okay, now an instance method, and by instance we mean called specifically or made specifically for an instance, basically a specific object of this. So for example, with name and age, those are instance variables. Those each object gets a copy of. So if I create one person and then another person object, each of those objects will get their own copies. They're not shared. Okay, so we do have the concept of sharing data or methods as well. That comes with the class variables or class methods. Okay. All right, so let's do this. So def info, and remember this kind of shortcut syntax here. I'm going to put a string with string interpolation. I'm going to put name, space, and then in parentheses we'll put also some string interpolation, and then of course an end, right? And then an end for the class as well. So the class needs its own end as well as the methods needing theirs. Okay, so we have to delimit the end of the class. Now, for this example, we'll just do it in the same file. We're going to create, outside of any class or method, we're going to put it in this namespace here, or at least outside of any method we're dealing with. We're going to create an instance of P1. Okay, call that Ada, and she is 36. And then we're going to say put s p1.info. And since that it does not take any parameters, okay, we didn't need the parentheses here or there. Let's see what that actually prints out. Okay, so Ruby person test.rb. It does, as you probably can imagine, print out Ada 36, as we see down near the bottom. All right, next up, let's talk a little bit more about instance variables and accessors. So local variables die when a method returns. Okay, so instance variables, like the stuff with the @ symbol in front, live as long as the object does. So we can access them via methods. When we do that, we don't want to expose the raw state by default. Ruby can also generate reader-writer methods for you called att_reader, att_writer, and att_accessor, because they're the variables inside these classes can also be called attributes, right? So when you make a class, you often want to store instance variables like name and age, etc., and then provide ways to read or update them. In languages like Java and C#, you typically explicitly write getters and setters, although C# also has properties that can take on similar qualities to what we're dealing with here. Let's do some example here. So let's create another file. This one's going to be called dog-getter. We'll call that dog-getter.rb. We'll create a class dog, okay, and it will have an end, all right, attr_reader, okay, and that's name right there, okay, so it's interacts with name. Def initialize name, and then we'll set the internal attribute or class level variable to name. Okay, there's our class. And this basically, the reader is only a getter. So you can look at the value from outside the class, but you can't directly change it. Okay, this is good for values that you want to be read-only from outside the class. So down here, if I say d = dog.new, we're going to pass in Fido. So we've created it with its name. put sd.name, and that will work, okay, because we've made it so that this instance variable here, okay, we've made it so that it is labeled as with attr reader. So if someone tries to access it right like this by its name, it will allow us to do it because we're just reading it. But if we do d.name equals max, that will actually give us an error, okay? So let's try this and see what happens. Okay. So we're getting an error. It says syntax errors found, unexpected colon. Let me see here. Maybe that's not what we're after here. Let me see if that's the problem. There's another error. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. That should not have a space. There should not be any space between the colon and name here. Okay, so oops, save it, and then there we go, Fido. Okay, so it's printing out Fido. Now if I erase that, let's see what happens. We have an error. Okay, so it says undefined method name equals for an instance of dog. Now what that's telling us is that I can't use it in this way because I've actually labeled it, telling it, hey, I only want this to be readable, not writable. All right, let's try another one. We're going to create another one. We'll call this secret setter.rb. Now, this creates only a setter. You can assign it, but you can't read it back directly. This is useful if we want to allow updates, but not direct reads. Okay, for example, like sensitive information. So there's our class secret. And in here, we're going to say attr underscore writer, and then space colon code. The colon and the code have to go together. I goofed on that one earlier. Wasn't paying attention. So def initialize the code. We take the internal instance variable, instance attribute, and set it to code. And then after this class is done, I want to say s equals secret.new and pass it xyz123 or whatever you'd like. And then s.code equals, okay, abc456. Maybe we pull it from file or a network or something else, a database. But then if I try to read it like this, that's going to actually fail. Okay, so put s secret setter.rb. Not put s, I'm sorry, Ruby secret setter.rb. And it's telling us that undefined method code for an instance. The issue is that we're trying to use it as a getter, but it doesn't allow us because we set it as just a writer. So if I comment that out and I run this, it will actually work. Now, there's no output because we didn't do anything, but that's what the output is. Now, we could create a separate method that returns code information or things like that. But what happens if we want both? What happens if we want it to be both? There to be both a getter and an accessor. We create a new file. We will call this, this one's also person. We'll say person, let me see here, person accessor. Okay. Now, it's literally called accessor, but in this context, accessor often means getter. But in this case, accessor creates both getter and setter. Okay, so class person, and then we want end. Okay, attr accessor. I want to do space name, comma, and then another space, and then colon age. Don't forget the colons, and they have to be right next to those names. So def initialize name and age. Okay, we're gonna, now this is kind of cool because I can actually do them all on one line. Okay, this allows us to do this all in one line. Name at age equals name comma age. So similar to Python. Python allows you to do this as well. All right, so we've got the initialize. We're setting the name and the age. This allows us to reset those afterwards. So p equals person.new, Ada, who is 36. And then if I want to do put s p.name, that should work because the getter quality of the accessor is here. We can also say p.age equals 37. Yay, had a birthday. Put s p.age. That will allow us to access it again. Okay, so let us see what we do here. All right, let's see here. Ruby person accessor dot RB. We get Ada and 37. Okay, so you could also do something like, let me see here. You could also do something like this: p.age plus equals 1. Okay, and then print it out again. So I could say number, we'll say p.name, and then say is now, and then again with the pound sign, p.age. All right, let's run that and see what we get. We see that Ada is now 38. Okay, so again, when to use which? ATTR reader is the default if you only need outside code to look at the value. And ATTR underscore writer is rare, but good when external code should update a value without directly seeing it. Okay, it puts data in but doesn't read it. And ATTR accessor is a quick and convenient, but you got to think before using, because sometimes you don't want external code to have full access. Okay, so always think it through. All right. Next up, we're going to create another file, and this one we will call, let's see here, we'll call it counter fun.rb. All right, so let's write some code and then we'll talk about it. So class counter and then end. Now at count equals 0. Now that makes it a class variable. Okay, so this time it's shared. It's like a static variable. And I'm also going to write some additional code here. This is going to be kind of weird syntax when we first do it, but we'll talk about it. So we do a semicolon, then at count plus equals 1, and then end. So that's one way we can actually write that on its own line. So self.count. This is a class method. Okay, so class method. Now, this is very confusing to a lot of people, especially those coming from Python, because self, in this case, with Python, it would make it instance. But in Ruby, this makes it a class or static method, meaning it's not an instance method. So this is a way to get it to be a class method. Okay, so self makes it class, not instance. Now, what do we do inside that? Well, we can say at count. So that's just going to return the count. Okay, so we're able to return the count. Now, outside here, we're going to say 3.times and then counter.new. Okay, we're creating those 3 counters. Put s. We're going to say counter.count. And that should return, since I created those 3 objects in memory, that should return a 3. Okay, so Ruby counterfun.rb, and it does return a 3 as we expected. Okay. And note that instead of this syntax right here, if you don't like that, we could have written it the more traditional way, not the idiomatic Ruby way, the way that probably many people prefer. We could do it like that. Okay, so that does effectively the same thing. All right, so no semicolons when you're doing it in this type of syntax. But if you're doing it all on one line, you can do it like that with semicolons. That's one way to accomplish that goal. Prints out the exact same thing, though. All right, so next up. So we turn our attention, of course, to encapsulation and visibility. All right, so encapsulation is core to object-oriented programming. So we group data and behaviors and control what's visible from the outside. Ruby methods are public by default. You can mark helpers as private. Protected allows access from instances of the same class family. Okay. Encapsulation and visibility are part of the standard object-oriented toolkit that Ruby emphasizes. So we're going to create a couple different files here. I'm going to create bankaccount.rb. And then I'm going to create another one called, I guess I'll call it probably bank demo. Let's see. Yeah, that sounds good. Bankdemo.rb. Okay, so bankaccount.rb. We're going to say class bank account. Okay, with our end. And let me see here. We're going to do def initialize balance. Okay. And I'm going to say at balance equals balance and end on that. We'll come back to that if I remember to talk about a different syntax we could use. Okay, it's a shorter syntactic sugar syntax for that, for really any methods. So we've got def deposit amount. We're going to say at balance plus equals, and we're doing sanitize. We haven't defined that yet, but we will. Okay, so we've got def deposit, def withdraw amount. That also has a minus equals sanitize the amount. Okay, you'll see what sanitize does in a second. And def balance. Now again, this, if you just write it by itself, it's just returning that value. I don't have to use the keyword return. Okay. And then we have maybe a private helper method. So I just write private, and then anything below that, we've got def sanitize. Sanitize takes an amount. And what happens is we say we raise argument error that says negative, okay, if amount less than 0. So if they're trying to deposit a negative amount or withdraw a negative amount, which is going to mess things up with the balance, we don't want that. Otherwise, we return amount, okay? So again, this raises an exception if the amount is less than 0. If it isn't, it'll skip over that line and it'll just return that statement right there, return amount. Now, another syntax I want you to be aware of is called the endless method definition, which is a shortcut or syntactic sugar. This is from Ruby 3+. And instead of writing the initialize method this way, which is fairly straightforward, it's okay if you want to do it that way, there's another alternative. So if you see this, you'll know what to expect. So we do initialize balance, just like we did before. Okay, same header, but notice that we can say equals, and then I'm going to say balance equals balance. Okay, so anything past that first equal sign is considered the body of the initialize method. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, what do we want to do in our bank demo.rb? Now, for this one, I'm going to pull in that bank account information. We'll talk more about this momentarily in another example. But for right now, I want to pull in that file bankaccount.rb. So the way I want to do that is I'm going to put require and underscore relative. Okay, require and require relative are also available. So we're going to say in double quotes bank account. So it's going to look relative to the same folder that we're in, that this file, the bank demo, is in, and it will find a file called bankaccount.rb. So it'll include it. I'm going to now take advantage of that, say bankaccount.new, give it 100, put S, we'll say initial balance, and then we're going to do $, and then the acct.balance. And then let's do some deposits. So deposit 50, and put S, we'll say after deposit, $ number acct.balance. Okay, now let's do a withdrawal. Okay, withdraw 20. Okay, we'll say put S after withdrawal. Okay, $ number sign ACCT balance. So the $ isn't anything special. We literally want to put a $ in front of it. The number or pound sign is to make sure. Fun fact, this is, although some people say hash sign or hash symbol, we frequently or usually call it the number sign or number symbol. It's also sometimes called the pound sign in the US and Canada in particular. It also has other names like Octothorpe. We believe that name probably came from IBM in the 60s. It's kind of a joke name actually, but some people like that name. So, but we need it there if we're going to do string interpolation. Now, this syntax is like try catch. Okay, so if you're familiar with try-catch syntax, basically we're putting the stuff that could be a problem in here. So we'll say try to deposit -10. That should trigger an error. So rescue. So instead of try-catch, it's begin rescue. Argument error. And then we'll put an arrow to 0. And then we'll say put s error is, not 0, I'm sorry. I don't know why I typed 0. My notes were weird. Okay, so error is pound sign, and then we'll say e.message. e.message. All right, and end. And then finally put s final balance $pound sign. We'll say acct.balance. Okay. Ruby bank demo.rb. Okay. Oh, I must have spelled sanitize wrong on one or more of these in the demo, or no, in here. Sanitize. Okay, good. I think that's it. Let's try it again. There we go. Okay, so we end up having an initial balance of 100 because that's what we inserted into the account originally when we called the constructor, right? So that calls the initialize method here, sets the balance. We deposit 50. After that deposit, we have 150 down here. After a withdrawal of 20, it now says 130. And then when we try to do acct.deposit, we put this inside the begin rescue because we figured this could potentially cause an exception, which it will, obviously, throw an exception or throw an error. Deposit -10. Since that violates the contract over here, we print out negative. That's actually the message that is sent with the argument error. So it says it raises this kind of error and negative. Okay, otherwise it returns amount. All right. But since the argument error occurs in the rescue part, if this were working properly, if we just said deposit 10, it would actually skip over this part because there'd be no exception. But since there was a negative in front of that and it violated the argument requirements right here, because if amount less than 0, it did in fact cause that error to be thrown or exception to be thrown. So we do print out that exception. And then finally, we print the final balance. All right. Good. Next up, let's talk about equality printing and operator methods. So we can override the to_s, that's the toString for friendly printing, and the double equals or EQL question mark method for value equality. Operators are just methods in Ruby, so we can implement the plus, the flying saucer operator, or spaceship operator, as is the more common term, etc. So you can override pretty much anything that's an operator, okay, when it fits your domain. Okay, generally you want to do this sparingly. You don't want to go too crazy with the cheese whiz, but let's see what we've got here. So I'm going to create a new file. We'll call it point overrides.rb. So we'll create the class point and give it an end. attr reader for :x::y. Def initialize x, y. Now we're going to use this endless method definition syntax, although we could use the regular, it wouldn't matter. But in here, we'll say at x, at y equals x, y. That gives us the parallel assignment. So it sets x to the internal, it sets our internal instance variable x to the corresponding x parameter that was passed in. And it sets our y equal to the y parameter. Now we'll also use the endless method syntax for this as well. So we'll say def to_s. So we're basically overriding this behavior. We're We're going to put in parentheses, we'll just have it print out X and then comma and then number pound sign Y. Okay, so it'll print the X value and the Y value kind of as an ordered pair. And then what we're going to do is we will override the behavior of an operator. So I just say def equals other. Okay, and then I'm going to put an end there. So this is more traditional syntax on this one, but we're doing effectively the same thing. So is the first thing we're going to do. Pass point to it to make sure that the so if I'm a point and I'm calling this method on me, okay, so I have let's say this is my point and dot equals, and then this is the other point. What it's doing is it's passing this in as the parameter, and I am the thing on the left-hand side. Okay, so it's calling that. You normally don't need the dot, of course, but it's like that, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, am I equal to the other one? Okay, now when I say other, is a question mark point, the is a is like an instance of method or a type test method. So you pass point to it to make sure that they're not trying to, for example, compare this point to a horse or an integer or a donkey. Okay, so we want to make sure that the data type is right first. So we need that. If that's false, it won't even bother checking the stuff over here. So if this one's false, it'll literally just basically return the, because there's a return here implicitly, it'll return false. Okay, that's called short circuiting. It doesn't even need to check any of the other stuff if this is false, because and, what's the deal with and? You need both of the operands to be true. And if the first one's false, do you even need to check the second one? The answer is no. Okay, so other x is equal to other x, and y is equal to other.y. And we have the end, of course. Now down here, we're going to put s point.new 1, 2, and then put s point.new 1, 2 is equal to point.new 1, 2. Okay, so I'm basically just showing what happens when we create these. Okay, and the reason I'm able to just say put s point.new here, well, wait a minute, that creates a class. How is that going to help me? Well, since put s expects a string, it's actually going to call toString automatically. So that's the same as if I said dot .toS. We could use an extra variable, so I could say, something like pt1 equals point.new 1, 2. If this makes you feel better, we can do that. So pt1 instead, but the idea is the same. Okay, it will call the toS. All right, Ruby point overrides.rb. We get it to print out 1, 2, which we expect. Now, why did it print it out like that? Now, can we change it? Can we make it look, different? So the number, again, so we'll say something like this. It's magic, just so you can see that this is actually printing it out. I'm not pulling any wool over your eyes. So every time I print it out, anything, when I just say the name of the object, I don't call any method specifically on it. It automatically, when it's expecting a string, will call the toS method. Okay, that's actually the same thing essentially that we do in languages like Java as well. But we don't want it to really print its magic. We do want it to print the parentheses and then just the values of x and y. Okay, pretty cool. All right. Next up on the hit parade, we have modules, namespacing, and mixins, like include and extend. So Ruby doesn't have multiple inheritance like C++ does. So in Ruby, a class can only inherit from one parent class. Now, in that way, it is similar to things like Java. So, but Ruby lets you mix in modules to add behavior to a class. Okay, so a mixin is basically a module that defines methods. It's not considered a class. A module's not a class, but it is an entity that does define methods, and you use include for instance methods or extend for class methods to quote unquote inject that module's functionality into a class. So a mixin's a way to share reusable behavior across classes without inheritance. All right, so let's look here. I'm going to create a file. We're going to call this mixinfun.rb. Okay, looks good. Now, we'll talk about the code in just a minute, but I'll say module identified, and then an end, right? So inside here, I'll put this, and then we'll talk about the code momentarily. So def ID, okay, we'll just say ID, and we're going to say ID, and I'm going to do this syntax, which looks a little bit weird, but we will discuss it. Self.class.name, and then a hyphen, number sign, object, underscore ID. Okay. So, all right. Now, what this is shorthand for effectively is this. Let me write this below here, and then we'll comment it out. So this part right here, this ID part, that's shorthand for this. So it's first going to do a nil check, and then if the ID is false, okay? So if it is not initialized yet, essentially. So the first time you call it, the ID is nil, so it will assign the string, okay, that self class name and then the object ID. But next time, since ID will already contain a value, that will be considered truthy, so it will skip reassigning and just keep the old value. Okay, so we would put like ID equals, and then self.class.name, and then the same thing as this. This hyphen is not anything special. This is just basically saying that we want there to physically be a hyphen there, right? So the ID method will generate the value once and it reuses it. Okay, so what happens if I take that? Okay, actually I'm going to comment that out because we only need one of those. They do exactly the same thing. And I do want an end for my module here. And let's say we created a class user. And in here, I'm just going to type include identified. Okay, right? That's the name of that module. That will just add the ID as an instance method. Okay. So then later, if I say something like this, put s user.new.id. Okay, we're directly calling it here. Again, you could do something like this. I could say, user1 equals user.new, and then you can, I can comment that out. You can do this, put s user1.id. You could do that instead of doing this all in one fell swoop here. But here, Ruby mixin fun. Looks like we have a little bit of a problem here. Did I put an end on that? Oh, no. That's fine. That's okay. One second. ID. Oh, you know what? I think I did the same thing I did the other time. Let me see. Let me look. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you don't want a space here. That's the first thing. And then I spelled this wrong. So that's identified, not indentified. Okay. So and now it prints out user 16. Okay. So it's important to note that for the different parts of the data we're getting here, just so we're clear here, the self.class, self is the current object. Class gets the object's class, and then name returns the class's name. So that is why it is printing out user here. The hyphen is printed directly, right? Because we included it here. The hyphen is printed directly, and then the object ID, every Ruby object has a unique numeric identifier during its lifetime. So it's how Ruby keeps track of objects internally. So it usually is displayed as some sort of integer. Okay, so object ID is automatic. This is automatically available because we are inside of a class. Okay, everything has an object ID. All right. So why do we even use a mixin? What's the reason for this? So each object gets a unique ID string. in this case, but it's only generated once. So it uses lazy initialization, and it's efficient. There's no need to recompute the string every call. So it's really only calculates it once and then returns it as needed. Another thing related to these are enumerables, okay? So an enumerable is just a built-in Ruby module. It's not a class. It lives in the Ruby standard library and defines a whole collection of useful methods. So for example, map, select, reject, max, min, sort, etc. But here's the catch. Enumerable doesn't know how to walk through your collection by itself. Instead, enumerable requires your class to provide one method, and this method is called each. All right. The each method, we call it the each hook, is required in order for the provided methods like map, select, max, etc. to know how those methods work on the elements that you're applying it to. Okay, so said another way, the each implementation that you provide makes it so that when we call a provided method like select or map or reject, max, min, whatever, Ruby is really running enumerable's select method, but because of the each, it knows how to work on that collection. So it calls the method with each element in the array one by one. Okay. So let's create a couple different new lovely files here. I'll say bag.rb and bag underscore demo.rb. So the bag is a very simple data structure. We're not filling in all the possible things it could ever do, but it's also called a multi-set in a lot of different languages, a bag. So I'm going to just put include enumerable, okay? And I'll say def initialize. We're using the endless method syntax again. We're setting items equal to items, okay, instead of using the end or the anything else. So this is another endless syntax here, endless method syntax. We'll call this BLK for block. Okay, we'll talk about this in just a minute, so do not worry. And then the body of this says for each of the items, we pass in that or apply the block. Okay, so that's the required hook, the each method. So now, because of that, including enumerable and defining each, we now have access to the map, select, max, min, etc. Okay, that comes from enumerable. All right. All right, now bag demo. I'm going to say require relative, type bag, since it's in the same directory or same folder. We have access to it. I'm going to call this, we'll call it B, although bag would be better probably. 3927. So I'm calling the constructor, okay, or the initialize method by saying bag.new. And I'm going to say b.select, okay. P is just another print type method. So put s is like human friendly output. It'll ultimately call the to underscore s or the to string. Print is like put s but with no new line automatically, and then p is like a debug friendly output. It actually calls on inspect instead of to s. Okay, so that's the difference here, just in case you're wondering. Inside of select, we're going to put this. I'm going to say underscore one dot odd question mark. Now I'll explain that a little bit better in a moment. Actually, I'll explain it now. It's the first block parameter. So it's basically going to ensure that you can take those elements of that array, and we're going to print each of those as they exist in the array. So it'll print, for example, the odd values inside that array. So 3, 9, and 7 is what we should get. We can also print b.max. Okay, again, that's a method call, even though it doesn't have parentheses. So if I want to run this, I'll say ruby bag demo.rb. And I get, of course, 397 because those are odd. Now, odd, again, is a built-in method. It's not one we wrote. The underscore 1 just says the first block parameter. We could do underscore 2 for the second, underscore 3 for the third, etc. And pb.max will print out the maximum value. Okay? All right, let's go further. Now, this is an interesting feature that a lot of other languages would not really give you the ability to do. They might, some of them give similar things like stylistically in some ways, C sharp's extension methods or things like that might seem similar, but it's not exactly the same type of implementation, but has some similarities. So Ruby lets you add method to existing classes. These classes are open classes, so it's very powerful. It's really good for DSLs or domain-specific languages and convenience methods. You can avoid surprising changes to your core behavior. This is going to show us how Rubyists commonly prototype simple domain-friendly helpers like this. So we can use a class that already exists, like string, integer, etc., and add things to it. Okay, so even if it's something Ruby provides, for example, I'll call this string underscore reopening.rb. Now I'm going to say class string as if I'm coming up with the name of this class. Now it's not going to completely change its behavior. It's just going to add stuff to it. So when I say def vowels, this is that endless method syntax again. I'm going to say scan. It's going to return scan of / now in brackets AEIOU / I. Now this is kind of weird syntax for us, but this is a regular expression. If you don't really know how those work, that's totally fine. But it's basically looking for anything. It'll return true on each of those things that matches one of the things in the square brackets. Okay, so regular expressions are a language all to itself, and often you can use syntax similar to this in a multitude of different languages, whether it's C sharp's regex interpreter, or whether it's C++ or Java or Python or Ruby, as we can see, or Rust, or many other languages have regex interpreters, JavaScript. So let's see what we get here when I say put s, this is a test, and then I'll say dot. Now it's taking that whole string. I could put it in a variable or just call it directly on here, which I'll just call it directly this time. We'll say vowels, so it will call that vowels method that I just defined. Now, by default, if I did not do this, if I did not add this reopening or extension up here, it would say, I don't know what that method is. But since I added it here, it still knows what a string is. It still knows that this is a string literal, but we have added this behavior to it. So I'm going to say that, and then that will return a string itself with the vowels in it. And I'm going to join each of the things it returns with a hyphen. Okay, we'll see what that looks like. So let's do that. Ruby, I'm going to call this string reopening, or call it as string reopening, and it prints out IIAE. Now, why does it do that? Because if I scan this string from left to right, just like it did, it scanned them, I'm going to get an I. That's the first vowel that I come across because it matches one of these. There's nothing magical about the word vowel. I defined it up here. You'll get I, and then another I, an A, and then an E. None of the others are vowels. So that's why it's printing out those. Just as another quick example, let's do integer. So I'll call it integer reopening.rb. Class integer, that gets an end also. I'll say def hours. So I'm going to just define this method here, and it's going to take self times 60 times 60. Okay. Now, if I say maybe sleep 2.hours, so it's expressive, but you changed integer globally. So we have to be very, very careful with that. Okay, so if I say, for example, Ruby integer reopening.rb, give it a minute, it'll actually sleep for 2 hours. So don't we don't want to wait around on this. Okay, so I'm actually going to not do that again. All right, so I was hoping you'd stay there for another 2 hours and wait and see what happened. But, if you'd like to pause the video for 2 hours, that's perfectly fine. but I'm not going to put up with it. All right, so as a bit of a note on something we have actually seen thus far, but I wanted to maybe clarify it a little bit further. As projects grow, putting classes in separate files and loading them becomes more and more important. We saw it require relative, okay, and then the file name. Those are for files within your project. So it resolves paths relative to the file it's written in. Now, the regular old require searches Ruby's load path, which is in gems/stdlib, okay? But you can use prefix // to pull them from your current directory. So you can say require, and then, in the double quotes, you could put // and then say the file name. But a lot of people prefer require relative because it's just clearer what it's doing and it's cleaner syntax. There's another option like load that will reread the file every time, but that's kind of rarely needed nowadays. Now, another thing you should be aware of are class constants and the class object. Okay, so constants like default port equals 6379 or whatever belongs to a class module's namespace. Also, classes are objects, so string.class returns class. That will matter when you assign behavior at the class level or pass classes around. So let's create a file. I'm going to create this file. We'll call it config underscore test.rb. Class config, and that's going to have an end also. And in here, I'm going to create a class constant. Okay, so my class constant is going to be the default. So we can say default timeout equals 5. And that creates that as a class constant. Okay, so if I want to, I can say things like this. So I can say config, name of my class, : default timeout. Okay, now if I do that, Ruby config test.rb. Okay, so that will just print out, well, nothing apparently. Oh no, there we go. There's the 5. Okay, I don't know what I was looking at, but there's the 5. So everything's good. I was thinking I was going a little bit mad. Okay, now string.class. Let's see what happens there. And then let's try this, hello.class. Because remember, everything is an object in Ruby. Whether it's the literals or whether it's the classes themselves, they are all considered classes, okay, or objects rather. So the first one, obviously, we get our 5 again, but we also get string.class. That prints out class. That's actually the class that string is, okay? So string is an object as well, and it also has a class, which is class. The hello.class, that's an actual string literal. That string literal is an object, because everything's an object, and that, of course, is an instance of a class directly. So in Ruby, the classes themselves, again, are also objects, so they're considered first-class citizens, and the string class itself is an instance of class, which itself is a class, and hello.class returns string because that is a class. It is a string literal. All classes will return class when interrogated with the class method, .class method. Okay, so if I write one called rectangle or whatever, it's going to most definitely return the class. Okay, so that's what I have for you this time around. Hope you're doing well with the course and like the material, or if you're watching this and not in the course, hope you enjoy this overview of Ruby. I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.